Hi everyone and welcome to my at-home studio. I'm Laura Vahlberg and I'm going to demonstrate how I make collages with hand-painted paper. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's get started painting. Okay, so we're going to get started by getting out a drawing board and some plain old computer paper. I've got 4 pieces here. I'm putting them down on the board. This is a drawing board made by Heritage, but any kind of drawing board will do. So I'm putting the 4 pieces of paper down and securing them to the board with small pieces of tape just on the corners to maximize the space that will be painted. So we'll have some beautiful painted paper. Okay, so now we're going to get some kind of cup. I've got a reused yogurt cup. I've got a little bit of water in it. Probably filled it up a quarter of the way with water. You don't need a whole lot. Got some paints out. I've got acrylic paints. It's Liquitex, I believe. Got white, red, blue, yellow, and green. Got them all lined up. Also have this nice big brush. I believe it's about 3 inches, 2 to 3 inches wide is good. So yeah, I'm going to start by just putting the paint directly on the paper. You could put it on a plastic plate or something like that if you want to pre-mix, but I find that I waste the least amount of paint this way. And I kind of enjoy the process of mixing the paint straight on the paper. It can come up with some fun effects. So for this first piece of paper, I believe I put down some white and some green. So I've got this lovely kind of turquoise color. And notice I'm not washing my brush. I'm gonna see how this nice green mixes with pure yellow color. So now I've got this wonderful bright lime green going on. As far as values go, I would say value meaning the lightness or darkness of a color. I would say both of these colors are on the lighter end, but maybe would fall into the mid-tones. So just something to keep in mind for the future when we make our collage. As you're making your own painted paper, I would suggest keeping in mind having a range of values. Try and make painted paper that is really, really light. So maybe a lot of white paint with just a tiny bit of color. Also mid-tones, as I'm making here now, and make some nice dark colors as well. It'll provide opportunity for your collage to have some depth. So yeah, this paint color I just did, I mixed this lime green with some red and it made a sort of soft coral color. It's kind of fun. And I think for the last piece of paper, I mixed that coral color on the brush with some blue. So mixing all the colors together in different ratios can make for some nice muted tones. Okay, so once you have all your paper all painted, go ahead and wait a little while till the paint dries and then take off the tape very carefully. I use regular old masking tape. You could use artist tape if you want, but I find masking tape works just fine. For your collage, I would recommend making more paper than this. I would make ideally 3 pieces of paper that are a light value, 3 pieces of paper that are a medium tone, and then 3 pieces of paper that are a dark tone. More the better, really, as in like more than 3. But 3 is enough. So if you have a trouble seeing value, which sometimes I do, it helps to sort of squint at it, and sometimes the darks and the lights really will jump out at you. If they aren't solidly a dark color or solidly a light, then they probably fall into the mid-range category, which I think probably all 4 of these colors do. That bright lime green might qualify as a light. Okay, so that was a picture of the motif we're looking at, a window in my house. Now I'm showing you my box of collage supplies, my fancy glue. You can use pretty much any kind of glue. I use that Linoco pH neutral glue. I have 2 cutting boards. Those are my dissection pins. I have a paintbrush that I use for glue. That's my exacto knife. I use an exacto knife number 11. And then that's my piece of foam core. That's where I'm going to assemble my collage. So, okay, so now we have all the pieces of paper. I'm showing you I have 3 piles. One that is for a light value, one for a dark value, and one for the mid-tone. Found places for those 3 piles, and I'm just getting all set up. So I've got 2 cutting boards. One is for cutting with an exacto knife, and the other one is to put the foam core on, which is where I'm going to assemble my collage. So I'm going to get started by getting a light tone piece of paper. It's almost white. I'm cutting it down to the size that I think makes sense. And then I'm going to secure it to the foam core using my dissection pins. So I've got it secured. I've got something to work with, something to start with. Now I'm thinking about what's next. I'm thinking, okay, I'm making a picture of a window that's right in front of me. I've got this light tone that's going to represent the outside. And now I'm going to get a medium to dark toned colored piece of paper that's going to represent the interior wall. If you look at any window of your house, you'll probably see that there is pretty high contrast between the light coming from the outdoors and the light on the walls inside your house. If you squint your eyes, you can see the value pretty clearly. Sometimes it's almost as dramatic as it looks white outside and black inside. But we're going for a degree of subtlety here. So I've got a light tone for inside, and I'm using a couple of different colored pieces of paper for my wall colors, but they're very similar. One piece is a little bit warmer than the other. I'm creating a little border here to expand my collage a bit and get the feel for the scope of what this picture is going to look like. So in order to get an idea of what shape I want to cut the paper to, I like to kind of use my hands. You can sort of see how I measure with my hands a little bit to get a vague idea of how long for how wide each shape should be, so that my image can be constructed and ultimately somewhat convincing. Yeah, so I'm getting different pieces of paper. I think I'm pulling from my light-toned pile. And I'm holding it up to the image that I've started to see kind of which one makes the most sense. So I think I decided on a sort of green color and placing that in my composition. So I believe the white area is the top section of the window I'm looking at. And the green section is the bottom sash, the bottom part of the window, the bottom pane that I'm seeing through the window. So I think initially with this painting, I thought I might make the picture all about the top part of the window, the top sash. But now I'm thinking maybe I want to include the entire window or a little bit of the bottom pane in the picture. So I'm just following my curiosity and seeing what it looks like with maybe 1.5 panes in there. So you can see I've got a little bit of a border of a wall around the panes, and then a sort of skinny section of a darker toned paper to show the division between the top pane and the bottom pane of the window. I love collage because it's really shows how different shapes of color put next to each other can make an image, can make an illusion even. I am a collage artist, but I'm also an oil painter, and I use a very similar approach when I'm painting. I like to think that a painting is made up of large color spots, large or different sized color spots pushed up against each other, and when the color spots are the correct hue, temperature, and value, this sort of miracle of a perceptual moment can happen. Meaning when you look at it, there's sort of a moment of familiarity, like you can recognize a feeling of reality in a picture when the colors are correct. So in this collage, I don't know that I'm going for absolute accuracy, but I'm thinking about how to create that sort of familiar feeling that there's life, there's reality in this picture. So I just start off with larger pieces of paper, large color spots put next to each other, and I'm discovering the scope of the image I'm making. So I think with this blue color, this sort of teal, I'm attempting to bring the values of that green tone together, so it feels like the panes, that the top window pane and the bottom window pane are representing a world that is united beyond the window. I mean, oftentimes I will cut a piece of paper and find I need to edit it a couple of times before it fits the way I want it to into the picture. And sometimes I'll get it the correct shape and put it in there and pin it down, and then realize that it's not quite the right tone, so I trade it out for a different color. As far as organizing my space, I like to have my 3 piles of paper. I've got the light tone, medium tone, and dark tone, and then I have another little pile that's sort of the really little pieces. That pile ends up in the trash, but at least while I'm collaging, sometimes it comes in handy to have a little piece of a certain color to modify or edit different color spot shapes. Okay, so yeah, I'm working on the horizontals and the verticals of my picture. The motif, if you didn't get a really good look at it, is one of the windows in my house. It looks out onto our back porch, and we have a drop cloth that is secured over part of the back porch. So I really liked the way this looked because it's with the drop cloth, it's semi-translucent, and so you can see the railing of the back porch through the drop cloth. So you can see the railing through the drop cloth, and also we have some prayer flags on our back porch. I love them because they're such beautiful colors, red, blue, yellow, green, and white, I think. And so I was really enjoying how the prayer flags looked through the drop cloth, and how you could see the red and blue and yellow kind of coming through, the light coming through the flags and then through the drop cloth. It is sort of subtle, and so in the picture, in the picture you can see I'm trying to establish that there are 2 window panes. There's also a railing and a pillar going all the way from the bottom of the porch that runs off through the top of the picture plane of the window. And using different values to show that the light condition is different where there's no drop cloth as opposed to where there is one. So I think, yeah, right now I'm cutting some pictures or cutting some pieces of paper to show that there's a couple of dividing lines in the top window pane. It's divided into 3 parts. I like the way a window can sort of operate as a grid. I've got the one large area where there's the bottom pane, and then the top pane is divided into 3. And so now that it's divided into 3, I can almost look at those 3 sections as 3 different paintings, to then make decisions as to where each shape lives in those 3 sections. Yeah, so I'm looking through my lighter colors and my mid-tone colors to try and find the right color. Sometimes this process can take a while, just trying to find the right tone that will work in the picture. I mostly find that value is more important than the color itself. For instance, the drop cloth is not actually green colored, but the value, the lightness and darkness, the how light for how dark, seems to work the best in that green color. So I sort of substitute value for color in a lot of ways. I find in a picture when the value is right, it reads well, but if the color is right and the value is wrong, or the hue is right and the value is wrong, it often is hard to get a good structure that way. There's less depth if the value structure is incorrect. And the way to know if a value is right or wrong, I find is to squint my eyes, to sort of see the differences, to see how one color is lighter or darker than another. So now I've decided that that green color that I put on the bottom pane is a little bit too dark, and so I've decided that green color that I put down initially is going to be the color of the railing showing through. So now I'm cutting up a piece of paper that's a little bit lighter to indicate the negative space of the railing. It's going to show the lightness between the railing posts. So it's a little bit of a flip-flop, but it's sort of fun to play with negative space in this way. And one thing I really enjoy about the drop cloth is that it's all kind of one color, and then there's like subtle variations in showing the objects that exist beyond the drop cloth. So yeah, I've got my negative spaces between the railing posts. And then I'll go ahead and bring that negative space up into the top window pane as well, I believe. I think right now I'm looking to make a really small cut of paper to show that little string that shows where the prayer flags are attached to the railing. Okay, so now I've decided there's just a lot of pins going on in my picture. And so I want to go ahead and glue everything down so I can take all the pins out and continue working. So I've got a little piece of cardboard that I wrapped with wax paper that's working as my area where I pour out the glue, and then I also have a small flat brush that I'm using to apply the glue. So I've got my Linaco pH neutral glue. I poured it out onto the piece of cardboard wrapped in wax paper. I think I got the cardboard, it was like the back of a sketchbook. And so I'm just using my paintbrush to dip it in the glue and kind of go and find all the spots that are not secured and secure them with the glue. I find what I'll do often is I sort of tuck a little bit of glue under an area that where two pieces of paper are joined. I put a little bit of glue on the bottom and then a little bit on top, and then if it doesn't seem to be sticking really well, I'll get another pin to pin it down. You'll kind of see when you make your own how that is. So yeah, I'm looking for areas where the papers are not secured together, and getting some glue in there so that it all is a cohesive image for the moment. So yeah, I find that if I don't do this step once or twice while I'm making a collage, it just gets really crowded. There's a lot of pins. So I'll do a bunch of stages and then glue it down and wait for a little while for it to dry, and then come back and take all the pins out. You can see here how I've got my piles of paper. I've got my, I believe those are my medium tone paper on the right and the dark tone paper on the left. And then you can see my little pile of little pieces that I keep just in case. So here, yeah, I'm taking all the pins out. That's a really fun part, to take all the pins out and see all these cut out pieces of paper glued all together into one. It's fun to see it at this stage where it's starting to be its own painting. Yeah, so once you get all the pins out, just be careful as you pick it up off the foam core. And now I've decided I want to turn the foam core vertically because I want to make this picture even bigger. I think it needs to grow. I want to include the entire top pane of the window and the entire bottom pane. I think the whole process for me is just an experiment in composition, arranging the pieces over and over and over again until it starts to have a sort of harmony. I've been thinking a lot about the artist Mark Rothko lately. I love how his large color band paintings seem to have a sort of vastness to them. The swatches of color he has in his paintings often have a very thin kind of border around them. And it reminds me of windows. So I've been making oil paintings about this, and I'm also doing a couple of collages about how I can make a painting from observation. Make a painting from observation that might have some of the qualities of a Rothko. That feeling how the subject matter is very large, it takes up a lot of space in the picture, and it sort of pushes against the edges of the picture plane in a sort of intuitive, organic way. Um, there's a couple of different philosophies in collage making as far as cutting the pieces of paper. Some people prefer only scissors. Scissors make a much more straight cut often. Some artists do really like to make collage paintings that only involve very straight edges. That's not the way I do things, but you're welcome to try out all the different ways of doing things to find your own voice. I really like the exacto knife because I can make somewhat straight cuts, but I like the sort of organic feeling of a line that is intended to be straight but isn't. There's something very human about that I like. So at this point, I'm filling in the idea that there are two large window panes, and I'm bringing that pattern of the railing showing through the drop cloth into the bottom of the lower window pane. And I think I am using a little bit of the small pieces of my tiny paper piece pile in order to get the correct colors lined up to make the pattern I'm trying to make. I guess I didn't mention this before, but there is sort of a challenge to making a dark shape that is outdoors still feel dark, but also feel outdoors. So I have a spot like that that shows the ceiling of the back porch. It's that sort of swatch that's at the top of the top window pane, a sort of a purpley color. It was a tricky value choice because I wanted to find a color that was lighter than the interior of the room, but also dark enough that would indicate that area is in shadow. So just something to think about as I'm making this picture. Another thing I really like about the exacto knife is I can make really tiny cuts. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, you can see I'm doing a lot of measuring with my hands. And if you wanted to get really exact, I suppose you could use a ruler if you wanted to make your cuts super exact. It just sort of depends on what your goals are. I like to go for approximation myself. But yeah, it's entirely up to you what you do with your collage. I guess another thing I really enjoy about this process is putting the pins through the paper and into the foam core. There's something very satisfying about that. And then at the end of making the picture, you can hold it up to the light and you'll see all these like light pinpricks showing through your picture. It's kind of pretty. It's sort of like a constellation of sorts. Yeah, I think at this point I'm looking at how to make the prayer flags showing through the drop cloth. I'm realizing that the string that holds all the prayer flags up needs to have a real consistent kind of swoop to it. So I'm really taking care as I'm cutting my shapes out to maintain that line that sort of hangs from the place it's tied to the pillar to as it droops down across the top edge of the porch. I also want to make sure that the values are right in that the drop cloth is a lighter value than the prayer flags, but the prayer flags are only very slightly darker because they're just showing through the drop cloth. If the drop cloth weren't there, then the value contrast would be much greater. And I think that's partly what this painting is about, the idea of the values being very close together where the drop cloth is, and where it isn't, the values separate more. There's more contrast. And then, of course, there's the contrast of the interior of the room versus the light out the window. So I think this painting has a lot to do with value and contrast for me. I guess I'll also talk a little bit about motifs. A motif being the subject that you're looking at when you're making your picture. I find that motifs are everywhere. I really like the things in my own home. Like, for instance, this is a window in my own home. I've made collages of my dining room table and all of the things that end up on the dining room table. I had a vase of flowers the other day, and I made a collage of that, and that was fun. I had a painting teacher who someone posed a question to him. They said, "I just don't know what to paint," and his response was, "Do you have a basement?" And the person said yes, and he said, "Okay, well, draw the crap in your basement." And so I guess that was his way of saying that there's really beauty everywhere. There's interesting color shapes bumping into other interesting color shapes in the whole visual world. So I think really the trick to finding a motif is looking at something that interests you and deciding to look at it for a longer period of time as you make your artwork. I think, of course, during this time with the pandemic and everything, it is a sort of opportunity to look at our everyday surroundings and appreciate them for their beauty and what they have to offer. Spending a little more time to stop and smell the roses, so to say. So now I've decided I've got an image that I'm happy with for the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of gluing again. I guess as a side note, I'll say whenever I'm done gluing, I do try to run to the sink immediately and wash my brush out of all the glue. Otherwise, it'll just harden up and the brush won't work very well anymore. So yeah, I've got my brush, I've got my glue, my pins, and I'm trying to secure everything that is not secured so that all of the pieces of paper form one picture, one painting. Yeah, there's a lot of really tiny pieces at this point, so the gluing part can take a little while. I found that, again, collage artists differ on the whole idea of using pins. Some don't use pins at all. They skip that part and just secure one piece to another with glue as they go. That is another option. I think some collage artists also use glue sticks. That's another way to do it. I like the liquid glue myself because, I don't know, I guess I like to control the thinness or thickness of the glue. So yeah, I went ahead and glued it all together, took all the pins out, and I'm happy with my picture. So that I just showed you the pad of watercolor paper that I have. I got a piece of watercolor paper out, and now I'm gonna work on getting my collage glued to a piece of watercolor paper so it will have a sort of mat around it, give it a kind of finished look. But before I put it down onto the watercolor paper, I want to make sure that my collage is square. So I have my metal square handy, and I'm using it to trim away pieces that keep the image from being square. It just gives it a more finished look. Sometimes I won't do this step. I like the sort of organic edges, but I think some other collages demand a more clean edge, and that's kind of how I'm going with this image in particular. So I'm just sort of looking at it and deciding if the composition still works with this trimming. It's definitely part of the process for me. I make some actions and then analyze and then make more actions. So yeah, now I'm placing it on the piece of watercolor paper to decide how much of a border I want. I believe I decided I wanted a border that was about 1.5 inches, but that's entirely personal preference. Maybe you want a really skinny border, maybe you want just like a 1/2 inch. Some people like a large border, like 3 or 4 inches. So it's just entirely up to you. You can just sort of play with it and see what looks good to your eye for your collage. And I think in this collage, I did trim off too much. I was playing around with the idea of Rothko. I wanted to have really thin edges, and then I think what happened is the edges just got too thin. It didn't really work anymore for me. So I'm just kind of reducing and reducing. I mean, so much of art for me anyway is an act of constructing and deconstructing, adding and subtracting, until all the ratios feel harmonious. I'm still reducing, finding I need a skinnier border around my window. Going really, really skinny now at this point. Almost just a very little bit of wall showing. Yeah, this squaring up process can take, well, it certainly took me longer than I thought it would. So yeah, now I think at this point I'm thinking, okay, I cut off too much border. What am I going to do? I deconstructed, and now I'm thinking maybe it's time to do a little bit more of constructing. Well, okay, I guess at this point I went ahead and cut my watercolor piece to approximately the size I wanted it to be. I guess I hadn't decided to construct again just yet. So yeah, I think I decided about 1 inch or 1.5 inches on that border. So I'm measuring with my square to see how much watercolor paper I need in order to get the border that I want. It's really nice to have a metal square, but I think a plastic one would do well too. But it's nice because then I don't need to use a pencil to draw a line. I just go ahead and draw a line with my exacto knife. I find that I make straighter lines this way, and then I don't have to worry about a pencil line showing up on my mat. And it looks like I didn't make a sharp enough cut there, so I just gotta score it again to release it. Okay, so I've got my mat cut out, placing my picture in the middle. And I will say that like a collage can take one day, like it is in this instance. But it can also be really fun to make a collage that lasts a lot longer, like maybe work on it one day, like an hour a day for a week, and just kind of see what happens. Sometimes I like to do collage and have a goal. I'm going to add 5 pieces of color to my collage today. And then the next day I'll also do 5 pieces of collage. And then after, a couple weeks of this, that's 5 times, 14. I don't know how much that is, but it's a lot. It's a lot of colors, and it can make for just a longer journey. And some interesting problems to wrestle with. But, for today, I'm making a one-shot. So yeah, I think at this point, I got my foam core back out, and I'm saying I need a little bit more border around my window. It just got too small. It didn't quite work yet. And I think the sharpness of the perpendicular made by the square was not really working with the organic verticals and horizontals of the window. So I found that I needed the square to see what the square looked like when the image was all squared up. And now I'm adding, kind of just putting that wall color back on there so that it looks just a little more organic, so that the edges kind of match the organic verticals and horizontals of the picture itself, or of the window. But I mean, I could have gone both ways, right? I mean, I had really organic lines to make up the picture, but I could have just decided to make everything really square and use a square to cut all of my straight lines. And that's another option. That would create a much more rigid structure. It all kind of depends on what your goal is in your picture. I think for me, I like the organic lines. I prefer them a lot of the time, though there is certainly space for very straight kind of mechanical lines as well. But yeah, in this particular instance, I want to soften the edges and widen them a little bit. So I'm definitely using the pieces of paper from my tiny paper pile to thicken up those lines around the window. Another way you can apply glue, I often use just the paintbrush and the glue on my wax covered cardboard. But another way to do it is to just use your finger. You can dip your finger in the glue and just make sure that the glue goes under and on top of the place where the pieces of paper come together. I guess I'll also mention that in order for the pieces of paper to be secured to each other, the shapes often need to be just a little bit larger than they're going to look in your painting, so that there's some extra paper that will be used for the gluing section. This is just a little bit of extra for that tab that won't be seen. That'll be kind of behind other pieces of paper that will help secure the whole image together. So yeah, I'm looking through my pile of dark toned papers. I'm trying to find just the right value. I don't want it to be too dark, but I don't want it to be too light either. It's got to sort of fit into the key. I say key as in like a musical key of colors that make up the border around the window. And as far as the border around the window is concerned, I like the idea that each piece of the border is just a little bit different in width. Not a lot, but enough that there's not too much symmetry. I think there's there can be a real balance between symmetry and asymmetry, where it can look like something is right in the middle, but it's not quite. And that can create a nice sort of tension for the eye. And I think it's something that Mark Rothko really mastered, and I admire that and seek to emulate it in one form or another. A lot of people, when they think of Rothko, they think of color and the way the colors vibrate against one another. And I do really like that about his work, but I think the main thing that really speaks to me are his compositions. The way he composes different rectangles with different edges around the rectangles next to each other and within a rectangular picture plane. I think he was just a genius in that way. So yeah, I'm not really seeking to learn so much from the way he put colors next to each other, but more how he put shapes next to each other existing within the surface of the picture plane. So I'm sort of fine-tuning these edges of the collage painting, seeing what it looks like to make it just a little bit thicker, a little bit thinner. I think I'm also experimenting with the idea of adding another component to the bottom of the bottom window pane. In the motif itself, there is a table outside the window. There's also another railing you can see. I think there's also like a bucket. There's a couple of objects in there, and I wasn't really sure whether or not to put that in, because I didn't want to distract from the way that the prayer flags feel in the picture. I think if there's too much going on in a picture, it can make it less than it could be. I heard from someone, I can't remember where I heard this, the idea that let's say you're giving a speech at a wedding. If you want to be remembered, stand up and say one thing and sit down. And I think that really kind of applies for making paintings as well. If you try and say one thing, you'll be remembered. But if you're trying to say a lot of things and say them all kind of at the same volume, then I think it can get a little boring, a little cluttered. So yeah, at this point, I feel like there needs to be something else going on at the bottom of the bottom window pane, but I don't want to distract from the prayer flags, which to me, the prayer flags are kind of the most exciting thing about the painting. And the way the prayer flags are behind the drop cloth, that sort of light contrast is is what I'm exploring in this painting. So I don't really want to go off on another rabbit trail and explore everything that's on the table in the motif, because that just seems like a whole nother story, or maybe a whole nother painting. So I'm kind of vacillating here between putting something in but not drawing too much attention to it. I guess I'll say one more note about exacto knives. I made a mistake. I needed to order more knives, or more blades for my exacto knife. And I went on Amazon and I saw, 150 blades, number 11. And so I said, oh, okay, great, I'll get that. So I ordered it, but it wasn't from the Exacto company. And they were so dull. It did not work very well at all. It almost like ripped the paper instead of cut it. So if you're going to order Exacto knives with replacement blades, make sure you get the Exacto brand, or some brand that you know is really good, because otherwise you might have the same experience I did, where I just got a bunch of knives that I had to throw away because they didn't really work. So yeah, I think at this point I've just settled on a lighter sort of band of color for the bottom portion of the bottom window pane, and I'm gluing everything in. I'm using my paintbrush, and I think I used my fingers a little bit too. Just getting it all secured together, and I think at this point I'm going to be ready to put my picture on a mat and call it done. But as far as a picture being done or finished, I heard from an artist, I think it was Ken Cooley. I actually highly recommend any of you who love to read about art, if you Google Ken Cooley's Notes on Color, he offers just revelations about what it means to be an artist and how to work in a way that is fun and exciting and worthwhile. So anyway, in that Notes on Color, he talks about how a painting is never finished, it's only stopped. Because there's sort of an infinity to it. You can just keep going and going and going, because if you look in our visual world, there's infinite detail. And so really infinite material for the artist to draw from, look from, think about, organize. So yeah, I'm taking my picture off of the foam core yet again. I'm going to go get my piece of watercolor paper that I've already cut down to the size I want. Even though the border is a little different on my picture, I think it'll still work on my matte paper. And so in order to secure it to my watercolor paper, I'm going to do the same thing I did in making the painting itself. I'm going to get my foam core and my cutting board underneath the foam core, and I'm just going to glue it with pins and my paintbrush to the watercolor paper. And I think I'll do all four corners, but then also a couple of areas around the border as well, just so there aren't any awkward areas where the painting's sort of pulling away from the mat. I want it to be pretty securely attached to the mat. And I mean, if you're concerned about having holes in your matte paper, you don't have to use the pins. You can just use your finger and push it down that way. That may or may not work great. I mean, I feel like the pins really help to keep the paper down as it's drying. Sometimes the collage painting will sort of pop up while it's drying, and then you kind of have to do it again. But again, as I'm securing this image to the mat, I use the paintbrush to paint under the image and kind of on top of it, so that it's really secured to the mat. Okay, so at this point I'm going to turn my paper over and I'm going to sign my painting. There are many ways to do this, of course. The way I do it is I like to cut out pieces of paper for my signature. My signature is the letter L and the letter V, and then like a circle around the two letters. So it's pretty simple to cut out. It's a lot of straight lines. I like to cut out a circle and then cut out a circle within the circle, and then cut the L and the V out of that inner circle, kind of like the donut hole, I guess. And I like to put my signature right in the middle of the back of the painting. And I don't put a pin through it for this. I find that since the paper is pretty thin, like it's not a very wide shape, I can just use my finger and put glue around the whole area where I'm going to put my signature down, and then place the paper down on top of the glue, and then kind of paint glue on top of that again. And it tends to all stay down that way. Yep. And that's how I make collages with hand-painted paper. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, or you can send me a message on my website at lauravahlberg.com.